So our next speaker is Jérémie Rappaz from EPFL, Lausanne, and he will be talking about mapping the media landscape and the influence of ownership and broadcast schemes on modern news consumption.
Thank you for the introduction. Hello everyone. So we discussed a lot about how information spread online, in particular in social media. And we know how to analyze that most of the time, but this time I would like to discuss something a bit different, which is on how to map the actual media landscape, so the news publisher. And in particular, I would like to discuss about the influence on ownership in that space. I'm Jérémie Rappaz. I'm a PhD student from EPFL. I've been researching around I've been researching around this theme of the media for a couple of years now, and I'm the co-creator of the Media Observatory Initiative, which is actually a web platform that we're currently building to provide a lot of insights about the news landscape. And today I would like to share some of our recent research results about this. And I would like also to give some of the lessons that we learned along the way with practical insights, and also to tell you a bit where this is going. So we collaborate a lot with journalists, and the kind of the vision of the transformation is always the same. So that's the root of the problem. We have a changing business model, and the news industry is really shaped by this transformation. And this concerns the consumption of the media. So we have this increasing consumption of news from social media. We can also think about the changing business model of the news industry. I think we discussed that previously today. The paywalls, I mean, is a pretty good example of that, I think. But also the production of media is changing. So a lot of journalists today rely on social media, on open database online, and they even use artificial intelligence in news production. So we collaborate also with a news agency in Switzerland, and we kind of develop tools for journalists to help digging through those huge body of information. Also, the fact that we are exposed to this huge body of information online devaluate news as information. And by this I mean factual information. So traditional news media are no longer protected by information monopolies. And so if you're exposed to this huge body of information online, as soon as the news break, you will get the information, so the factual information. And so the work of journalists here is more about analyzing the information more than providing fact. We also know that, and this is kind of a paradox, that we have an increased readership uncertainty, so most of the people that browse news online, on social media, do not trust them. They expect them to be largely inaccurate. So that was from the Pew Research Center in the US. I think the number just came out in Switzerland. It's a bit less than that. But it's just to say that we know where this is going, right? So if we have this increasing uncertainty from the consumer, and we cannot provide a way to assess the news quality, then this can depress the entire market and eventually drive the market out of existence. Okay, and this is like a very theoretical result from the 70s. I think it's the Nobel Prize in economics. So of course it's theoretical, but it should be considered as a warning. So of course having more information online creates a lot of detrimental effects, but it's also, as researcher, it creates a lot of opportunities, and since we have more data to learn from, so that's more or less the goal of our initiative. We have more data. We want to rebuild trust by providing tools to assess news quality. Okay, and now we'll try to explain you how it's done. So we have plenty of sources of information online, and discussing with you, with some of you yesterday, I wanted to share a bit what we're doing and what is available online. But I won't go into too many details. You can find my slide online. So for example, GDELT is this massive effort that collects news from all around the world. It's really a great effort. It's free. You can access it in BigQuery or in CSV file. It has a very broad coverage. It contains many meta-information. And it allows you to track many different events across many media around the world. You have paid alternatives such as Event Registry, Spinner, And even Twitter, I mean, we're using Twitter a lot, and from our preliminary analysis, you can collect around 95 to 99% of the news online by just streaming to the right sources online. So this was the boring part, but now let's start to see what we can actually do with news data and what can we observe in that space. So we started 2 years ago, and we created this matrix, which is essentially a huge matrix that correlates news sources and events happening in the world. Okay? So you can see here Fox, CNN, and New York Times, and we can track events, and by events I mean like a real-world event, and you can track who's discussing about that. So you can look at, this trail derailment in Cameroon, Julian Assange being sentenced, etc. Okay? And we started to ask ourselves, okay, what can we observe there? What are the correlations between news channel online, and can we create a map of this digital news offer online? So we borrowed from personalization methods and recommendation system techniques to kind of approximate the similarity between those new channels and ultimately create a map of it. Okay? And now the good question is, what is observable on this map, and what are the factors that make people the sources group together on this map? Just to be clear, so what I'm going to show is we'll observe a lot of news sources, so they are represented by dots, and when they are close together, it means that they basically perform the same filtering of the information every day. So here's the map that we created 2 years ago now, and you can observe that many of those news sources are grouped into a small cluster, okay? And one obvious factor that make them group together is, of course, their geographic proximity. So you can observe all the Indian sources, Canadian sources, UK and Ireland that are grouped together, and this makes sense because they cover the same local events. But something that was more surprising to us was the fact that a lot of clusters are defined by their syndication. So it means that those news sources are actually owned by the same company. And I guess you recognize some of the name there, in particular Sinclair Broadcast Group that has been under fire 1 or 2 years ago for exactly this. So because they acquire a lot of local news channels and then they propagate the same information in those channels. So of course this is a problem because it hurts the diversity in the news, and I don't know if you guys watched this video. I think it came out 1 or 2 years ago. It really exemplified the problem of the decreasing diversification in the news. So you can see dozens of local TV presenters that recite the exact same script written by Sinclair, and it's a bit, there's a bit of irony there because the script discusses about fake news hurting democracy. But I think it exemplifies the problem. And so that is something that at least we should be aware of and that we should make public. One cool thing that you can do if you have a map of the news landscape and if you know the distance between any two sources is that you can actually reinforce and foster diversity. Okay, so if you are a news aggregator, for example, and you want to pick very diverse news sources, well, if you have this a priori knowledge about what they publish, you can maximize diversity. So, for example, here on the left, you can see a very naive query, which is just give me the most prolific news sources online. And you can see that most of the sources are in this very narrow space. But by turning the knob and re-ranking the news channels, you can actually pick a more diverse views of the world. Another thing that you can do, if you have enough knowledge about news sources online, is to infer external influences, okay? But this is not something you can do with a static map. So we actually, and I will skip the technical details, but we clamped the sources in a common space, and we make the map evolve over time, okay? And we started to look for patterns here. So, for example, we took 150 channels that we knew were owned by one of those 3 large media companies in 2018, okay? So to name them, it's Great Television, Sinclair Broadcast Group, and Gatehouse Media, and we let this thing evolve to see what was happening. So you can see in 2015, a lot of channels were still spread apart, let's say, and they started to group together around 2017. But I mean, this could be due to many factors, including optimization artifacts. So let's take an example. So in 2017, September 1st, Sinclair acquired the Bounted station for $240 million. And so it was 9 months after this snapshot, okay? And you can see all the other news channels owned by Sinclair, and that I think there are 47 of them. And of course, in 2018, you can track the shift in coverage of those sources, since they, they took this alignment of content, which suggests this alignment of resources from those sources. To do this in a more exhaustive fashion, we tried to detect attractors in that space. So it means areas in space that tend to attract news sources, which mean that they will suggest that there will be a huge company that had an influence on news channels. And unsurprisingly, we found many of the news giants in the US, including the Enterprise, Gatehouse Media, etc. And one interesting thing that you can also do is that once you found attractors in that space, then you can track how channels are attracted by those spots. So here, for example, are 3 different news channels that have been acquired. You can see the acquisition date there. And right after the acquisition, you can measure the shift in terms of what kind of event they publish. You can see that this happened right after the acquisition for the 2 first, and this was a bit delayed for the 3rd. So not everything is observable through a selection of news. And for example, I think people ask a lot if we observe political influence in that space. We never observe that. And we believe that this is contained in the content of the articles. So what we're building now is actually a pipeline that can analyze news in real time. So we're collecting around 50K articles per day that we analyze using this kind of techniques, but also providing more a bigger set of indicators. And I will just give a glimpse of what you're building today. So this is work from my colleague Panagiotis Meros that is working on credibility assessment. And he's specialized on the scientific domain, so we're trying to provide indicators about if the news are actually credible based on this huge set of features. But the interesting result is not that we can just, give a random prediction about a news. The fact is that we can create indicators and give these indicators to non-experts. And if we give them to non-experts, well, apparently they can evaluate news article significantly better. Okay, so we are trying to extend this to the general domain. We're doing a lot of quote extraction. We have a partnership with a media in Switzerland that want to measure gender ratio in the news. So if we think about quotes, well, those are the people we give voice to in the news. So we would like to measure gender ratio there. And also we work with directly media companies, and we provide services such as text and image embedding and retrieval. By using image similarity, we can do search in multiple languages, etc., to dig across those huge bodies of information. So in conclusion, I would say that we are in this credibility crisis in media, and we need quality news more than ever, but also good quality news indicators. And here, at least for us, technologies, to aid journalists to dig through this huge body of information and to focus on what's important, which is the intellectual analysis. And also technology is to establish more transparency, and I gave a few examples on how we can use it to detect media bias and evaluate credibility. Thank you very much for your attention. You have all the information there, and feel free to reach me if you're interested. Thank you.
Are there any questions?
Thanks for the talk. The map about the shift of the coverage was very interesting to me. And I'm curious that what would happen to the audience of a channel when basically they're moving?
Yeah.
Or the audience also move, or because you tune to a channel because of the interest. And when the coverage change, are you also changing with them, or?
Very good question, thank you. So first, if we never did the experiment, so I think there are plenty of ways of measuring that, and it would be very interesting. No, I think that most of the shift I showed are about very local news channel. So my point is that people don't have really the choice. So if they want to, those are their local TV news channels, so they will continue to follow it. So my personal intuition about this is that there's no huge migration of users from one channel to the other after an acquisition, but yeah, for sure it would be interesting to test.
Hi. So the news sources that you were using, were these mainly like broadcast news sources, or you also have like online websites? Because I assume that online stuff has a wider variance in credibility than like broadcast news sources.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So as I said, so we are primarily relying on GZelt right now. So it's essentially online news. So basically, we can cover a lot of different mediums. So we have, TV channels, etc., but only the actual information they publish on their website.
Hello? Do you notice any sort of clusters around sort of like high credibility versus low credibility, like just sort of subjective clusters? Or?
I mean, this would mean that I can basically tag a whole cluster as a non-credible set of news, which seems a bit extreme, but no, nothing like that. I mean, we don't have example of really untrustful news in that space. I mean, those are like the major players in this area. But I guess we can probably extend that to, the well-known disinformation sources online, and yeah, it will be very interesting to track. Thank you.
I think we should thank our speaker once again.
Thank you.